There is a specific kind of silence that belongs almost exclusively to a generation born into the gray space of history. It's the sound of a house where the television is humming in the background, but no one is truly listening. It's the weight of a latchkey turning in a lock at 3:30 p.m., the metallic click signaling that you are, once again, the master of your own lonely universe. To be Gen X is to be the world's middle child, squeezed between the deafening roar of the boomers' idealism and the hyper-connected, anxious digital pulse of the millennials. You are the generation that was told to figure it out, to toughen up, and to stay out of the way. And you did. You became the masters of self-reliance, the architects of irony, and the keepers of secrets. But beneath that whatever shrug and the cynical exterior lies a profound, unexamined architecture of survival that we are only just beginning to name. If you grew up during this time, you likely learned early on that your emotions were an inconvenience. You were the latchkey generation, raised by parents who were either chasing the dying embers of the American dream or navigating the wreckage of the first great divorce wave. You weren't just independent, you were emotionally orphaned in plain sight. There was a silent contract written into the walls of your childhood home. I will provide the roof, and you will provide the invisibility. You learned to read the room before you learned to read books. You learned that a parent's stress was a storm you had to weather alone. And so you grew with thick skin, not because you wanted to, but because the air was too cold without it. This is the psychology of the neglected middle. When we talk about trauma today, we often think of massive, singular events. But for Gen X, the trauma was often found in the gaps, in the things that didn't happen, the conversations that were never had, the I love you that was implied but never spoken, the bruises that were ignored because kids will be kids. This is what psychologists call ambiguous loss. It's a mourning for a connection you never quite had, a sense of safety that was always conditional on your ability to not be a problem. You became the generation of high-functioning dissociation. You can handle a crisis better than anyone. You can manage a corporate merger, a family emergency, and a failing marriage without breaking a sweat on the outside. But that's because you were trained to disconnect from your own needs at the age of 7. When you were left alone to navigate the world of predatory playgrounds and empty kitchens, you developed a survival mechanism, the invisible wall. This wall kept the world from hurting you, but it also kept you from feeling the world. Think about the way you view authority. There's a deep-seated skepticism in your DNA, isn't there? You watched the leaders of your youth fail. Watergate, the Cold War, the explosion of the Challenger on a classroom TV screen while your teacher sat in stunned silence. You learned that the adults weren't coming to save you. This birthed a radical, almost feral self-reliance. But the cost of that self-reliance is a profound, underlying exhaustion. It's the weight of carrying the world on your shoulders while pretending it weighs nothing at all. You are the generation that has it handled, but who handles you? This psychological blueprint is often referred to as the parentified child. Because your parents were often preoccupied with their own liberation or their own survival, you stepped into roles you weren't ready for. You were the emotional mediator for your mother's loneliness. You were the quiet shadow that didn't wake your father after his double shift. You learned that your value was tied to your utility. If you were helpful, if you were quiet, if you were low maintenance, you were safe. But low maintenance is just another word for self-neglecting. As you move through midlife now, that neglect is starting to catch up. The whatever attitude that got you through the 90s is starting to feel like a heavy lead vest. You might find yourself looking at your own children, whom you have likely raised with a fierce, overcompensating presence, and feeling a strange, bubbling resentment you can't quite name. It's the resentment of seeing someone receive the emotional scaffolding you were never offered. It's the realization that you were a bridge for everyone else to cross, but no one ever stopped to see if the bridge was cracking. There's a concept in psychology called emotional erosion. It isn't a sudden break, but a slow wearing away of the self through decades of being the strong one. You've spent 40 or 50 years suppressing the child who just wanted to be told they were doing a good job. You've replaced vulnerability with sarcasm, because sarcasm is a shield that doesn't look like a shield. It looks like a joke. But lately, the jokes aren't as funny as they used to be. The cynicism, which once felt like a cool counterculture badge of honor, is starting to feel like a prison cell. You are living in the U-curve of happiness, a psychological phenomenon where life satisfaction hits its absolute nadir in your late 40s and early 50s. For Gen X, this curve is deeper and steeper. You are the sandwich generation, squeezed between the needs of aging parents who still don't know how to apologize, and children who are navigating a world more fragile than the one you knew. You are the shock absorber for two different eras of humanity, and the pressure is immense. We have to ask, what happens to the person who was taught that their feelings don't matter? What happens when the latchkey kid grows up and realizes they are still standing in an empty kitchen, waiting for someone to ask them how their day was? The answer lies in the way you have learned to hide your pain, even from yourself. You've become so good at toughing it out that you've lost the ability to recognize when you're actually drowning. Consider the invisible wall metaphor again. It's not just between you and others, it's between you and your own internal life. You might feel a persistent sense of boredom or a flatness to your existence. This isn't just aging, this is the long-term effect of muted affect. When you turn down the volume on pain to survive your childhood, you accidentally turn down the volume on joy too. You're living life in grayscale, convinced that this is just what being a realist looks like. But there's a difference between being a realist and being emotionally numb. The tragedy of the Gen X psyche is that you were the first generation to be sold the individualist myth so aggressively. You were told that you didn't need anyone. The lone wolf, the rebel, the grunge icon, these were the archetypes you were given. But humans aren't meant to be lone wolves. We're pack animals. And yet, many of you feel a deep, stabbing sense of isolation even when you are surrounded by people. You are the person at the party who is everyone's favorite listener, but you leave feeling like no one actually knows you're there. You have mastered the art of being knowable without being known. This brings us to the core of the struggle, the hyper-independent trauma response. For you, asking for help doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like a failure. It feels like a betrayal of the kid who survived the 70s and 80s by their own wits. To need someone is to be vulnerable, and to be vulnerable is to be at risk of the same neglect that shaped you. So, you keep the walls high. You keep the whatever ready at the tip of your tongue. You keep driving, keep working, keep fixing everyone else's problems. But the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. The tension in your shoulders, the insomnia, the sudden bursts of unjustified anger at a slow driver or a broken appliance, these are the screams of the child you silenced 40 years ago. That child is tired of being the strong one. That child is tired of being the bridge. The question we must face now is what happens to the survival skills that saved your life begin to sabotage your spirit. For decades, your hyper-independence was a superpower. It made you the most reliable person in the room. It made you the one who could navigate a crisis without flinching. But in the quiet hours of the night, that same superpower feels like a straitjacket. You've realized that being unbreakable also means that you have become unreachable. The pivot begins when you realize that your cynicism isn't actually your personality. It's a defense mechanism that formed over a wound of profound disappointment. You were the children of the me generation, parents who were often so busy finding themselves that they forgot where they left you. To cope, you adopted a stance of detachment. If you didn't hope for much, you couldn't be let down. But living without hope is like breathing through a straw. You get just enough air to survive, but never enough to truly run. Healing for Gen X requires a radical, uncomfortable act, the dismantling of the whatever shield. It requires admitting that you actually do care, deeply. Beneath the layers of irony and the classic rock playlists, there's a reservoir of untapped grief for the childhood you didn't get to have. You need to acknowledge that it wasn't normal to be that lonely. It wasn't just how things were to have to raise yourself. By validating that pain, you stop the internal erosion. You start to bridge the gap between the child who had to be invisible and the adult who is tired of being unseen.
This is the path towards integration. It's the process of looking at that kid with the latchkey around their neck and saying, "You don't have to be the guard anymore. You did your job. You got us here, but I'll take it from here." For many of you, this will be the first time you've ever felt truly safe, because for the first time, you're not looking for safety in the hands of others. You are creating it within yourself. You are learning that vulnerability isn't a weakness you can't afford. It's the price of admission for the intimacy you've been starving for. As you move into the second half of your life, you have a unique opportunity. You are the bridge generation. You understand the grit of the old world and the sensitivity of the new. When you heal your own neglect, you become a powerful force for the generations following you. You become the elder who can say, "I am strong, and I am also hurting. I am capable, and I also need you."